Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pravicha Acharya Asthura Shishimat, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Pravicha Acharya Asthura Shishimat, His Divine Grace Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki. Anantikoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki. Naam Acharya Silaridas Thakur Ki. Prem se kaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki. Sisi Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyam Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhan Ki. Vrindavan Navadip Dham Ki. Ganga Mai Jamuna Mai Ki. Bhakti Devi Tulasi Devi Ki. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki. Itaya Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotee. All glories to the assembled devotee. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada Ki. Hare Krishna. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 13, and text number 48 and 49, which will conclude the chapter, the descendants of Dhruva Maharaj, and then we'll move on to the 14th chapter, which describes the story of King Vena. So I'll just read the word for word. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vignaya Nirvidya Gatam Praja Purohit Amatya Suhit Gana Adaya Vichikyu Urvyam Atisoka Kata. Actually, Atisoka Raha. Yata Nigudham Purusham Kuyogina Vignaya Nirvidya Gatam Patim Praja Purhit Amatya Suhir Ganadaya Vichikyur Urvayam Atisoka Katara Yata Nigudam Purusham Kuyogina Vignaya Nirvadya Gatam Patim Praja Purohit Amatya Suhir Ganadaya Vichikyur Urvayam Atisoka Katara Yata Nigudham Purusham Kuyogina Vignaya Nirvadya Gatam Patim Praja Purohit Amatya Suhir Ganadaya Vichikyur Urvayam Atisoka Katara Yata Nigudham Purusham Kuyogina Vignaya Nirvadya Gatim Patim Praja Purohit Amatya Suhir Ganadaya Vichikyur Urvayam Atisoka Katara Yatam Nigudam Purusham Kuyogina. Okay, we'll do the word for word. Vignaya, after understanding. Nirvidya, being indifferent. Gatam, had left. Patim, the king. Praja, all the citizens. Purohit, priests. Amatya, ministers. Suhit, friends. Gana Adaya, and people in general. Vichikyu, searched. Urvayam, on the earth. Atisoka Katara, being greatly aggrieved. Yata, just as, nigudam, concealed, purusham, the supersoul, kuyogina, inexperienced mystics. The translation: when it was understood that the king had indifferently left home, all the citizens, priests, ministers, friends, and people in general were greatly aggrieved. They began to search for him all over the world, just as a less experienced mystic searches out the supersoul within himself. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The example of searching for the supersoul within the heart by the less intelligent mystics is very instructive. The Absolute Truth is understood in different features, namely impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such kuyogina, or less intelligent mystics, can by mental speculation reach the point of impersonal Brahman, but they cannot find the Supersoul who is sitting within each living entity. When the king left, it was certain that he was staying somewhere else. But because the citizens did not know how to find him, they were frustrated like the less intelligent mystics. So, a very instructive purport. In the background, you've been following this chapter, the previous chapter also, 12th chapter, and before that, those various chapters were discussing Dhruva Maharaj, and then we came to the point of now the descendants of Dhruva Maharaj, and specifically about King Anga. And King Anga was very frustrated with materialistic life, and he left because he had a son, Vena, who was so sinful and engaged in atrocious activities, bad activities. So he wanted to leave, because material life is like that. We have to be frustrated with material life to make spiritual advancement. You have to be frustrated with it. Otherwise, you won't become such a pure, a strong devotee. If you just come with all the facilities, you were wealthy, you had all your good facilities, and you just come into the temple. But when you go through some challenges, some frustration, then it's an impetus for you to move ahead. Well, what Krishna is teaching me? What lesson am I learning? And you find people sometimes, they come to the temple, they say, we want to join. We want to live with you all. So we ask them, what's the reason? Say, you're frustrated with life outside there. But they don't know that's not so easy to live here either. Both places is difficult, whether you live in the temple or you live outside. It's difficult, but the temple is definitely a better place to make spiritual advancement. So here the subject matter in the purport is discussing of the Absolute Truth. And the Absolute Truth is where Prabhupada writes in a purport which I find very interesting, and I spoke about it before, and I won't speak about it in detail, but I just mention that Prabhupada, I found that he quotes a lot of verses from the Bhagavad Gita in his Bhagavatam purports. Somehow he always supports the verse, whatever he's speaking, from other scriptures as well, but a lot from the Bhagavad Gita. And in this particular chapter, in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he quotes this verse, Vadanti tattva vidas tadvadam jnanam avyayam. Advayam. Brahmati paramatmi bhagavan iti sabhadyate. So learned transcendentalists who know the Absolute Truth, they understand these three different phases. That is Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. And as a devotee who is practicing Krishna consciousness, it's important to understand those different aspects. Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan. Ultimately, the devotee is aspiring to have a relationship with the Bhagavan feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But we also do find people coming from different backgrounds may have an attraction for the Brahman feature of the Supreme Lord. And there was one person, he's almost about 38 years in the movement, still has that attachment for the Brahman feature of the Lord, to enter into the effulgence of the Lord. There is also that type of people. And although he comes regularly, he chants, but he still have that attachment. And some people want to have a relationship with the super soul, the Paramatma feature. But ultimately the devotee wants to have a relationship with the Bhagavan feature of the Supreme Absolute Truth. So it's one person in different features, the Absolute Truth. And there in the purport is saying that the Absolute Truth is understood in three different features, namely impersonal Brahman, localized Paramatma, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Such Kuyogina or less intelligent mystics can by mental speculation reach the point of impersonal Brahman, but they cannot find the super soul. So people search and and they come close to like trying to see the super soul within their heart, the different processes of yoga, Ashtanga yoga, and other types of yoga. And they have a desire to see the super soul. But they may not see it because it really requires a lot of effort, and also it requires a lot of, to want to be celibate. Like in the Bhakti school, if one breaks, one may break the principle and he can be forgiven and practice. But in the Ashtanga yoga process or the other process of yoga, one has to be totally celibate to understand or come to see the super soul. So one may see like the light. They may see like a red light. Sometimes they see like, you find people say, what, I was meditating very deeply and I saw a red light. You hear people saying like that? They see some light. And when they see this light, then they think that they have seen the super soul. But they haven't. It's like even in the early days in ISKCON, the devotees were also into different types of meditation and they came from different backgrounds. And then the devotee said, Prabhupada, when my eyes is shut and deep meditation, we see a red light. And Prabhupada said, carry on chanting, the light will go away. The light will go away. So you carry on chanting and the light will go away. So the thing is, it's like we were once in a fair in Phoenix. It was the first fair that was probably the biggest fair that I ever attended in a township. And it was about 30 years ago. And then there was a group called the Raj Yogis. They do Raj Yoga. So all of a sudden the lights went out and then they were shouting for the Raj Yoga people to put it on. So yeah, but there are different aspects, Prabhupada is just describing, and you have to search. But the analogy is given here is that how, King Anga had left and had gone into the, wherever he had gone to, they couldn't find him. They were searching for him. So similarly, a person has to search, he has to pass the Brahman feature, search for the super soul, and then come to the point of the Bhagavan feature. But for devotees who are practicing Krishna consciousness, we just worship the Bhagavan feature of the Supreme Lord on the altar, and we don't have to go through these other processes. Like the Paramatma feature is not an eternal feature in the spiritual world. It's like Prabhupada give the example, like we were talking about the fair. The fair was all put on, and then after it's finished, after the fair was over, everything was removed. So similarly, the Paramatma feature is not an eternal feature of the Supreme Absolute truth. And a devotee does not aspire for that, to realize the Paramatma feature. But the king's leaving, had caused the people so much of grief, pain. It's like when one leaves, there's separation. And in separation, there's a lot of pain. Like we were in Vrindavan recently, a few weeks back, at least a week and a half back. And one man from Mauritius went missing. He was a pujari in Mauritius. He come to Vrindavan with his family, and then he was gone. They couldn't find him. And the whole police and was looking everywhere for him, and then the government of Mauritius got involved, and they the Prime Minister of Mauritius contacted Narendra Modi, and they said a whole search party looking for that person, but they couldn't find him. Vrindavan. But he came, but he just lost his memory. From what I gathered and what I've heard, that he lost his memory. He was still thinking that he's in Mauritius and he's going to serve Radha Gokulananda. He still had that in his consciousness. And he was heading towards Govardhan. So his direction was right. His direction was right. It's like separation, and separation causes so much pain. Materially, it's so much pain. But spiritually, it's pleasure. There's more pleasure. Spiritually, there's more pleasure in separation. And we find that in the whole Gopi Geet. Is talking about, especially, the later chapters from 29 to 31, was talking about the Gopi Geet, or the separation. And when we was, every time I would look at this person's picture on the wall, because it was pasted everywhere, and I was thinking, when they're going to find him? And I was going to Govardhan so often, many times up and down, to Govardhan Hill, and I was hoping that I could see this person. We couldn't find him. Then his son came from Mauritius, and he started looking for him, and still they couldn't find him. And when I left, he wasn't found. So you can see that separation, just like King Anga, he just left. But this is all due to the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. He creates a situation where he makes you leave a painful situation to get into a better situation. You may be in an awkward situation. So he creates that situation that you could leave. Although it may cause pain to others. But going back to that devotee was, he lost his memory. Which verse reminds you in the Bhagavad Gita about memory? Which verse? 15:15. Huh? Sarvasyaham cha hirdu sanavishtu matasmitir jnanam apanam cha. So I'm seated in everyone's heart. From me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. So even when one forgets, that is also Krishna consciousness. Because he's also remembering Krishna, even in forgetfulness. He's remembering Krishna. He's remembering Bhagavad Gita. So we may be put in certain painful situations, like the citizens here were put in because the citizens were attached to the king, because the king is considered to be like the father. And when one loses one's father, then there's so much of pain. There's so much of pain. And then one feels lonely. That even like in Brahman platform, if somebody is trying to realize the Brahman feature of the Absolute Truth, he feels lonely when he enters the Brahman, because there's no activity there. But loneliness is one thing. Like if you're alone and you're feeling lonely, that's understandable. But when you are with people and you become lonely, that's more painful. That's more painful. When you're with people and you are lonely. And that happens. Because Krishna consciousness is man, the important aspect of Krishna consciousness is revealing one's mind. That's real association. Because you can live with it's advantageous even to just live with the devotees. But if we don't like really connect and have confidential friends that we can really reveal our mind to, not everybody, and somebody you could choose. It doesn't mean that you have to have, reveal your mind to everybody, but somebody who can help you in the process of Krishna consciousness. Sri Raghunath ki. So the analogy was given like how frustrated less intelligent mystics become. People who are searching after the Absolute Truth and they are speculating, then they become very, very frustrated. Then, I just want to read the next verse also, because we meant to read the 49th verse, which doesn't have a purport. When the citizens could not find any trace of the king, after searching for him everywhere, they were very disappointed. And they returned to the city where all the great sages of the country assemble because of the king's absence. With tears in their eyes, the citizens offered respectful obeisances and informed the sages in full detail that they were unable to find the king anywhere. Rita brother, you just missed out when I was talking about the devotee from Mauritius who went missing. Yeah. You knew him well, right? The devotee who went missing from Mauritius in Vrindavan. Yeah. So they went, they went back to the great sages, and this is interesting. They had a duty to perform. They went out there, and they couldn't find him, and they came back and gave a feedback to the sages. But they were also not satisfied that they could not find him. And then there were tears in their eyes, and they offered obeisances. So in some ways, even in ourselves, we may not be successful in something, but it does not mean that the person is not satisfied, even if he was not successful. Just like when you go out there and distribute books, and people may not buy books. Sometimes you have a whole day and nobody is buying books and you're trying to sell these books. But then, but still the devotee feels satisfied in the sense that he went out to do this, his endeavor. And there was one devotee, her name's Rati Manjari. She was a book distributor. She lived in the temple here. She now lives in Mayapur, Vrindavan, Mayapur. And she would say she would pray deeply to the super soul in that person's heart. Please, please, please take this book. And she would stand in the streets in West Street and distribute these books. And praying to the super soul. So going back to the purport, the super soul, and what is the function of the super soul? Because sometimes we have certain desires, and we ourselves cannot fulfill that desire, isn't it? I'm sure you have lots of desires. And you try to, like the Bhagavad Gita explains that I like that verse, very interesting verse. I was just reading it this morning when Jai called me. 5:15. Because sometimes we feel that we may engage in a sinful act. And we blame it. I didn't do it, because, Krishna is sanctioning everything. Isn't it? Everything is sanctioned by the Lord. So he said, nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of ignorance which covers their real knowledge. And Prabhupada gave an extensive purport. And he talks about, in the purport he speaks about a living entity has a capacity to desire by his free will. But it's a very beautiful purport, and then he speaks about, and I'll read this. Being in a bewildered condition, therefore, the embodied soul identifies himself with circumstantial material body and becomes subject to the temporary misery and happiness of life. The Lord is the constant companion of the living entity as Paramatma or the super soul, and therefore he can understand the desires of the individual soul, as one can smell flavor of a flower by being near it. Desire is a subtle form of conditioning for the living entity. The Lord fulfills his desires as he deserves. Man proposes and God disposes. The individual is not, therefore, omnipotent in fulfilling his desire. The individual soul is not, therefore, omnipotent in fulfilling his desires. The Lord, however, can fulfill all desires, and the Lord, being neutral to everyone, does not interfere the desires of the minute, independent, living entities. So the super soul in our heart is not interfering with our desires. It's neutral, but it just sanctions. That's his function of the super soul. It's just sanctioning. And not that he'll fulfill all our desires. Sometimes we are desiring so hard something, but that is also Krishna's mercy, and he may not fulfill that desire that you are wanting to fulfill. And then Prabhupada writes in the purport, he quotes an Upanishad. The Lord engages the living entity in pious activities so that he may be elevated. The Lord engages him in impious activities so that he may go to hell. So in this pastime also that we're reading about King Anga and Vena now, we're moving into that. Anga was pious. And because he was pious, then the super soul sanctioned things differently for him, made him leave the situation and go out into the wilderness And although he took shelter somewhere, as the purport says, but the people did not know where he was, but he was somewhere. And then the Lord engaged him in impious activities so that he may go to hell. So the son, Vena, is engaging in impious activities and he'll go to hell. So the super soul, it doesn't interfere in one's desires. And then Prabhupada quotes another verse. He says, the living entity is completely dependent in his distress and happiness. But with the will of the Supreme Lord, he can go to heaven or hell as a cloud is driven by the air. But then he goes on to conclude his purport. The Lord neither hates nor likes anyone, though he appears to. So it's not that he hates Vena and he just likes Anga. It's not like that. There was in a book written by Giriraj Swami, the Dancing White Elephants, this book, and there's a nice discussion on this point about the super soul. There were many guests, and I'll just paraphrase it. The discussion was on this particular verse. The fifth chapter takes 18. What's it? Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmana Gaiva Hastani Suni Chaiva Swapakacha Pandita Sama Darshinaha. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and a gentle Brahmana, a cow and an elephant, a dog and a dog-eater. So that kind of position, seeing equally, Pandita Sama Darshina, that was the topic of discussion, that Prabhupada said he was not on that level of seeing equally. He was not on that level of seeing equally because that's a very high stage. And this one of the guests said, but that means that if a person commits a murder, a sinner. So Prabhupada, because he's saying it's the same, just like somebody commits a murder, is it the same as some pious activity or good activity? Is it the same? I'm asking you. Because you say the humble sage, by virtue of true vision, he sees with equal vision. Is it like that? He's seeing both, good and bad. He's seeing no difference in it. So Prabhupada said, no, I am not on that position. I make distinctions. And I'll read this paragraph, what Prabhupada said. Yes, that is a very high stage. Samadarshinaha. Samadarshina means there is no distinction between what is sin and what is virtue. As soon as you see this is virtue and this is sin, it is not on the Samadarshina. Because as soon as you discriminate, then it's not equal. Yet he said clearly, Vidya Vinaya Sampane, Brahmane. A Brahman is a learned and Vinaya, very humble. These are signs of goodness. Vidya Vinaya Sampane, Brahmana Gaiva Hastani. Suni means dog. Now, when he sees a dog and a learned Brahmana, do you see it the same? No. So that's why Prabhupada is saying this is a high stage. Now the dog is supposed to be sinful and the learned Brahmana is supposed to be virtuous or pious. Therefore, in his vision, the virtuous and the sinful are the same. That is Samadarshi. So Prabhupada is saying that he don't see it like that. Then again, another guest, he says, I think they made mistakes in writing the slokas. That was really and then Prabhupada says, that's all right. Now you're finding faults in Vyasadeva. So who can talk to you? Please excuse me. Please go out. You are finding faults with Vyasadeva. So they are saying that they want to be understood. And Prabhupada, you're shouting, I'm not Shamadarshi. I'm not Samadarshi. You say. And the guest is saying, Prabhupada, but you should be. Because he's a sadhu, you should be. You should be seeing with equal vision. So therefore these verses may not be taken out of context. If somebody asks me, even if I'm seeing with equal vision, I'll say no. I'm seeing you are not following this process, you're not doing what I'm doing. I can't see it equally. So like this, so then he says, you should be Samadarshi, but I'm not in that stage. I say because you don't surrender to Krishna, you are sinful. That is my darshan. But then the guest there are many guests, so the different guests, guest number 1, 2, this is the 5th guest. He's saying, you should be seeing like that equally. And Prabhupada said, no, why shall I? I am not in that position. I am simply repeating the words of Krishna. That is my point. I may be Samadarshi, I may not be Samadarshi. My position is simply to repeat, that's all. So therefore, as devotees, this is one understanding, that we should repeat what we heard. But we have to give it in our own words also. We have to have some realization. That's also important. Because our flavor is also added to what is being said, or what we have read. That's also important. We meant to quote the scriptures, we meant to show people, yes, in the scripture you surrender to Krishna, but also there's our flavor. Don't forget that. So these people are pushing Prabhupada, asking him, what is your contribution? And I'll read this. Srila Prabhupada explained in his books that one on the highest platform does not make distinctions. He sees everyone engaged in the service of the Lord. But when one takes the position of acharya or preacher, one must make distinction for the sake of instructing others and delivering them. Even the highest devotee acts on the intermediate platform when he preaches. And Giriraj Maharaj is remembering Srila Prabhupada's strong criticism of persons who were still in the bodily concept of life but try to imitate the highest devotee. The Uttama Adhikari knows that there is no difference between the vastly learned Brahmana and a dog in the street, because both of them are of the Lord, although they are embodied differently according to the qualities of material nature. Such a learned devotee is not misled by material bodies, but is attracted by the spiritual within the respective entities. Those who imitate an Uttama Adhikari by flaunting a sense of oneness or fellowship, but who behave on the bodily platform, are actually false philanthropists. The Uttama Adhikari sees the living entity soul and serves him as spirit. Thus, the material aspect is automatically served. Finally, this is the conclusion now. There's a 6th person who comes up and he has one question. And the question that he raises is that every teacher have some interpretation of the knowledge. And because Prabhupada was the successor of somebody, he said, also you should have made some contribution. So you are teaching others to be Samadarshi. The guest is raising that. You are teaching others to see on an equal vision. And Prabhupada said, my Samadarshi, this is interesting, he says, is that why should only Hindus know Krishna? The whole world should know Krishna. But if you, the Hindus, refuse to know, what can I do? So Prabhupada's equal vision was that he He gave everybody Krishna consciousness without any discrimination. That was his Samadarshi. That's how he looked at it. So he just repeated the messages of the previous acharyas, and he just repeated the message of the previous acharyas, and he gave Krishna consciousness without discrimination, because he was on that highest platform of Uttama Adhikari, but he was acting on the platform in the intermediate stage, giving people Krishna consciousness, whoever came. And we find that in so many, so much of his pastimes, when he met people and how he preached to them very intelligently. Like we met a Muslim man called, in the Prabhupada Lilamrita, you can read about a Muslim man, Daud Arun. You go read about him, but you see how systematically Prabhupada was preaching to the man. Prabhupada was in the audience, Prabhupada was sitting next to him, and then when they invited the speaker to come forward, that he didn't realize that Prabhupada is the speaker. So when Prabhupada went to the stage, then Prabhupada told him, just take care of my books. And then he was taking care of the books. But there was a conversation, there's lots of detail, but in the conversation, he told Prabhupada, I'm a Muslim, and Prabhupada said, oh yes, he's talking about the Quran, he spoke about Islam a little bit, and very appreciative at the same time. And the way he dealt with the man. And then finally, the man, now Prabhupada gave his lecture, and he gave a very, very strong lecture. He dove into the topics about not the body, the soul, and he explained. And the man was also captivated. And then when Prabhupada jumped off the stage, so many people came around him. And this man, Daud Arun, Prabhupada instructed him, now you distribute my books. So he started distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. The Srimad Bhagavatam. He was distributing. And then Prabhupada told him, you put the money in this little box, explain him what to do, and he did that. So, and then the people, they're thinking that this person is an associate of Prabhupada, he's like, and they're asking him questions. So you can see like how Prabhupada saw it in equal vision. He engaged everybody in that sense in Krishna consciousness, and that was his main contribution. And finally, before the person could leave, he paid for his set of the Bhagavatam, and he left. It was a few volumes, probably. First canto, some volumes it was, and he took it and he left. So like this, we are discussing, because the purport spoke on the super soul, the different features of the absolute truth. I thought we will just speak a little bit from that angle. Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Okay, can you give Jai the microphone? He's prepared a lot on this thing. He didn't have a chance to say it because he's sick this morning. He got me to do it. It's interesting. I normally chant in the temple room, and I don't bring my phone to the temple room when I'm chanting. And then I went to the room, and then Jai was calling. So the Super Soul told me to go to my room. and I answered the phone.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for that presentation. Interesting verse you quoted from Bhagavad Gita. I think it's 5:15 or 5:14.
5:15, yeah.
Yeah, there, Krishna, he absorbed himself from any blame. He says, that the tendency is that we blame God for anything that happens to us, isn't for our suffering or some bad things happen, where is God? But yeah, he absorbed himself from that blame. He says, I have nothing to do with your karma.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, And then previous verses to that, before that, there's three types of doers being discussed. One is you, who's desiring, and depending on the influence, which mode you are influenced, you are desiring.
Yeah.
Whether in the mode of goodness, mode of passion, or ignorance. Right? Then that's the modes of facilitating. The super soul is sanctioning, and you are desiring. So these three factors are there. And Krishna further explains that similar thing in the 18th chapter, in a more concise way. That we are there's three different tools. The super soul is simply sanctioning whether we're desiring in a good way or a bad way. Like the criminal may desire to kill somebody, and the super soul is facilitating that desire. It's because he's the heart of all living entities. He's sanctioning. He's a permitter. He's neutral. In so many ways, it's being discussed. And then the verse you quoted, the Vidya Vinaya Sampana, that's it's seeing the different entities discussed there. But what is the samadha is that the super soul is present in all of them also. So when we...
Good points, yeah. You see, sometimes we're blaming ourselves, sometimes we're blaming material nature, and sometimes we're blaming the super soul. So Krishna said no, because we tend to put the blame on somebody. And then the point that you were explaining, that every action has 5 factors: the body, the performer, the various senses, the different kinds of endeavor. That's what you're talking about, huh? Different kind of, and ultimately the super soul. These are 5 factors of sanction. And it says in the purport, under these circumstances, he who is acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of the super soul, situated within the heart, is naturally not bound by any activity. And whatever wrong or right action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these 5 factors. So whether it's right or wrong, the super soul is always sanctioning both, good or bad. So he's sanctioning both. So remember that, any activity. Like once somebody was telling me, that it's very difficult to work in a particular environment. I don't know, say, temple, I'd say just a particular environment. It's very difficult under a certain manager. They're finding it difficult. And then when a discussion came out, that the conclusion is that maybe the super soul wants him to stay there. He's sanctioning that. It's like, wants him to stay. But we should also look at it from the other angle that, okay, the super soul is sanctioning that for you that's right. But for the other person that's wrong. Also the super soul is sanctioning. On both sides, the super soul is sanctioning. So if somebody's performance is bad and by consensus is bad, then we can understand, well, you know what? We have to do something about it. Not now say, well, they leave it to the super soul. The super soul is sanctioning, we leave it. You get it? We have to do, something has to be done also. So we may as practitioners, we don't say, okay, Krishna is sanctioned, we will leave it, even if it's the wrong thing. Understand, Jai? We can't use that excuse now. As a super soul, as an excuse.
Ultimately you.
It's ultimately you, yeah. It's like you're a footballer, if you played football, the referee, in most cases is supposed to be neutral, Somebody scores the goal, and somebody who don't play according to the rules, he get penalized. There's penalties like that. In terms of football, in terms of our language, our game, like that. Any other comments, questions? We have a few minutes more. Anybody add anything? Bhaiya? Vijayananda Prabhu? Efficacious, yeah. Just like you may engage in you may kill somebody also. But you'll say, well, you know what? It's sanctioned by Krishna. But then when you go to court, they'll say, hey, right, you go imprisonment. That's also sanctioned by Krishna. That's also sanctioned by the Super Soul. You see? It's like that. It's like, Krishna is sometimes also in a dilemma. One person, the devotee is praying, I hope my things don't get stolen. But the rogue is also praying, hey, I hope I can steal today. So Krishna is a dilemma. So Super Soul is sanctioning these things. Okay, we'll stop here. It's 8:30. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Yeah, okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you.